Simon now. Simon, the book reveals, or alleges, I should say, let's start with the claim that Donald Trump wanted the Syrian president assassinated.
Absolutely, Sean. It's worth making the point that Bob Woodward is a highly credible reporter here in Washington, D.C. It was Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, when they were cub reporters at the Washington Post, who broke the Watergate scandal wide open, which ultimately led to the downfall of Richard Nixon. There are few more admired journalists here, and one of the central thrusts in Bob Woodward's book is this claim that the Defense Secretary Jim Mattis was ordered by President Trump to begin plans for an assassination attempt against the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. And James Mattis emerged from that call with the president that other officials at the Defense Department apparently heard and said, look, we're not going to do that. We're just not going to do that. We're going to take, as he put it, a much more measured approach. That is one of the many claims in Bob Woodward's book that the White House is pushing back against. The president described the book as a work of fiction within the last few hours. But I've got to tell you, Shahan, the White House has now got an even bigger problem on their hands than Bob Woodward's book, because within the last half an hour or so, the New York Times has published a commentary, an essay piece on its opinion page, written by a senior official within the Trump administration. They're not naming the official. They say they are preserving his anonymity in order to protect him. We know it's a male, and it is a blistering critique of what is taking place inside the Trump administration. I am part of the resistance inside the administration, writes this senior figure, who goes on to accuse President Trump of being amoral, impetuous, adversarial, petty, and ineffective, who says that he's ill-informed, engages in repetitive rants inside the White House. And the author claims two things. One, Americans should know that there are adults in the room. We fully recognize what is happening, and we are trying to do what's right, even when Donald Trump won't. And then there is this breathtaking claim that early in the Trump presidency, senior figures within the president's cabinet talked about invoking the 25th Amendment to the Constitution. That's the part of the Constitution that would effectively allow for the president to be removed from power by the people around him. Now, this author claims no one wanted to precipitate a constitutional crisis, so we will do what we can to steer the administration in the right direction until one way or another it's over. This is a devastating piece for the White House. There has been no reaction yet from White House officials to its publication in the New York Times.
It's likely, of course, that they will dismiss it, Simon, but it all plays into what Bob Woodward has in his book about the ridiculous things that have been happening in the White House, even saying that some officials have called Donald Trump an idiot.
Yes, absolutely. And the central thrust of Bob Woodward's book is that there has been what he refers to as an administrative coup d'etat behind the scenes within the White House by officials, including, Mr. Woodward claims, General Kelly denies it, the White House Chief of Staff, General John Kelly, who described President Trump, according to sources for Bob Woodward's book, as an idiot, completely unhinged. He's reportedly referred to what takes place inside the Trump administration as crazy town. This article in the New York Times underscores what is contained in the Woodward book, this claim that behind the scenes there are people, in at least one case, according to Bob Woodward, stealing pieces of paper off the desk in the Oval Office so that President Trump doesn't sign them and commit what they believe would be gross mistakes in terms of policy. This piece and the Woodward book taken together make very, very grim reading for President Trump and his acolytes.
No doubt Donald Trump will come out saying that this is all nonsense, as I mentioned earlier, but he hasn't, of course, responded to this open letter to the New York Times. He has responded to Bob Woodward's book and the contents of that book.
Yes, he has. He's dismissed the book as fiction. He says it won't make any kind of dent on his own popularity. And indeed, as far as his core supporters are concerned, that may well be true. But he's got a real problem with this book because Bob Woodward wrote it. He is considered one of the most respected chroniclers of the presidency. And in that telephone call, the excerpt of which you played at the beginning, later in that call, you actually hear Bob Woodward politely berate the president for not having agreed to give him an interview and saying to the president, look, President Trump, it's not good for the country that you won't sit down with me, as all your predecessors have done, to answer some of the questions people are raising about your presidency. And the esteem with which Bob Woodward is held here is something that the White House is going to find very difficult to counter.